Hello, and welcome to today's episode of our program Strategic Change Implementation in Action on Amogate Radio Communication. I remain your host, Titilola Ogushono. Today, we'll be discussing how to lead change management in a remote environment. Change management is not an easy task, as we could all agree with me, let alone leading or implementing change management in a remote environment. That is, having team members or employees who work off-site or virtually. This could come with peculiar challenges. Managing workers who work in remote areas. To manage employees in a remote environment, we need to look at what are the typical challenges in change management implementation in a remote environment. Once we envisage and you know what the typical challenges could be, then as a change manager, you find ways to mitigate these challenges, either to reduce them or eliminate them in totality. Now, the first one I'll look at is poor communication. One thing that we have realized that the challenges that we could experience in a remote environment is poor communication. Naturally, people are always curious about some certain things in a change process. They want to know what exactly is changing. What are the major components or the major units that will change? Would that be a merger? Would that be an acquisition? Would that be a downsizing? What exactly will change? Would that be a major change in the process, the way things are done? People want to know what exactly is changing. Okay, they want to know how this would affect them. This change process, is it going to affect them positively? Is it going to come with some drawbacks, with some challenges? Could it be as a result of this change process? Could it be an increase in incentives? Could it be that they could have to even work longer hours? People want to know how this would affect them. They want to even know what role that they will play in this whole change process. They want to know this is what they want to know. And they even want to know how with all of these change components, how would it affect everything in the organization? Now, you know that when people work in a particular place, in the physical environment, it's easier to communicate with them. But when people work remotely, they're in different places. So how do you communicate with them? So realize that poor communication is a major problem when it comes to implementing change initiatives in a remote environment. People work in various places, different time zones. So how do you communicate with them? So realize that from research over the years, we realize that people working in remote environment, poor communication has been a major challenge in implementing change agenda. I'll look at another factor. Another factor is lack of support or buy-in. More often than not, research has proven that middle-level managers are the most important for getting buy-in in any change management process. Why? Because due to their operative authority and closeness to team members, they could either support or even block the whole change agenda. So if we are going to talk about remote work, you have to realize that the level managers have a major role to play in implementing strategic change in an organization. So in a remote environment, the onus lies on how well you can train your middle-level managers to handle the change process. Another factor that you will consider, still talking about typical challenges of implementing change in a remote environment, is poor cultural practice. Your culture will determine how people would embrace the change process. When you have a culture that is stifling, when you have a culture that does not value your team members, when you have a culture where people do not feel respected, it's going to stifle them. And why it's so peculiar in a remote environment is that people work in different places. You could have someone in Africa, you could have someone in the UK, you could have some people working in the US, you could have someone else working in the Asian country. Now, what happens Asia continent. So what happens to you? How do you manage different people in different places with different cultural perspectives? So that's what makes remote environment really peculiar, because in the physical place, you're going to be familiar about the culture of the physical environment. So somebody who is in Africa, you are conversant, you're likely to be more conversant with what it means to be valued as an African. If those working in the UK, they are likely to know, be conversant with what they value, what value means to them in the UK, how they want to be appreciated in the UK. So what happens when people work virtually and they are scattered all over? Okay, they work in remote environment, remote workplace. So how do you inculcate all of these cultural perspectives to ensure that you ensure that you achieve your strategic intent, your strategic objective? So one of the challenges that you could have in a climate change agenda in the remote world is this poor cultural practice. We must have a culture that embraces all of these elements of cultural perspective from different places. Is very important, so that you do not have a stifling environment. Research has proven that when you do not check your culture, it stifles growth in the environment and you cannot even implement anything. So it's important. Thank you so much if you are just joining us. We are looking today at how to lead change management in a remote environment. The work environment is fast-paced now, and we have a lot of people working in different places. Poor communication, lack of support or buy-in, poor cultural practices. And another factor that I want to look at is that you could have difficulty with technology. Most things, most services, most processes have been automated. So in an organization where you want to move from a particular service provider or a particular software to another, a particular virtual platform to another, this usually occurs when there's a new change agenda and you want to adopt a new technology. Now, you realize that most times when organizations adopt a new technology, move from a particular platform to another. Now, it's not really much of a problem for those who we call on-site team members. They're in the workplace, so most times you make provisions for them. However, when you have remote workers and you have to find out adaptability of your technology with your remote workers. Okay, you must make sure that your remote workers do not find it difficult or challenging to access such platforms. Okay, when you make provisions for those that are working on-site, you must also make provisions for those that are working off-site, because if they do not have access to this platform, they are going to find the workplace frustrating. They are going to find it stiff. They are going to get disengaged. And why this happens is that relevant information that they need about the change agenda might not be accessed by remote workers. And remember, when you're implementing any change initiative, it's not just for those on site, it's for the organization as a whole. It's really cuts across all functions or units. So you must ensure that whatever technology you are adopting, whatever virtual platforms you are adopting, whatever software you are going to be using, whatever technology you are doing in terms of packaging software, you have to ensure that you make provision for your remote workers, because we have seen it over the years, okay, when organizations do not make provision for them and they lose out on relevant information, and this could frustrate the whole change implementation process. I will mention the last but not the least, another factor is low level of employee engagement. When people do not feel valued, when people do not feel that the organization think that they are important, especially those working in remote environment, when they feel that you have prioritized those working on site than those working off site, those working in remote environment, when they feel that they have been neglected, what you see is that people get disengaged. They don't feel motivated to do the work anymore. It's quite easier When you see people face to face, physically, you can easily detect when they are demotivated before it leads to disengagement. But how do you detect when your remote workers feel dissatisfied? How do you detect when they get into that zone of being demotivated? Then how much more when they get to that level of disengagement? So you look at it, dissatisfaction leads to demotivation, demotivation then leads to disengagement. So you see that the challenges here are quite enormous. So managers, especially the middle level managers, must be trained on how to be able to engage remote team members. It's always easier, like I said, to have to engage on-site team members. You see them every day. You are going to be used to their temperament, the way they react, the way they reason. But what about remote work? So it's going to require special training. See, you have to, managers must be trained to be able to engage remote team members. So these are the challenges. Now, we're talking about the challenges, okay, obviously, that will be apparent in implementing change agenda in a remote environment. So what are those measures that can be implemented, put in place to reduce the impediment to effective strategic change implementation process? The first thing I'm going to mention is that every change manager in an organization birthing a new change agenda must ensure that communication is clear and done frequently. Communication must be very clear and done frequently. Effective communication is one critical aspect of strategic change implementation, because it will tell you the vision of the change, the objectives of the change. It will tell you the benefits and even expectations of the change agenda. So your communication must be clear. It has to be effective. It has to tell your team members, your remote workers, what the vision of the change is. What are your expectations? What are the objectives? And what are the benefits that will accrue to them as individuals? What is the need for them and also for the organization at large? Communicating with remote team members could be a bit challenging. Like I said, this is because there are different time zones. They work in different time zones. You have less of physical interaction, even face-to-face engagement with them. In fact, it's often said that most times when you communicate, non-verbal communication plays a major role in the communication exchange. But these are people that, except you use maybe Zoom, some platform, and you see the video, most times you might not be able to see the gestures well. You might not be able to read them well. When you read them, they can even talk about emotion and intelligence. Okay, so now you know that these are the challenges. Why it's a bit hard, makes communicating with remote team members a bit more challenging. So now that we're talking about this, that this communication is how you communicate is very important. So what do you do with your communication plan? It's important first and foremost that your communication should emphasize what is changing. Change should not come at once to a person. That's some change processes. It should be faced. Okay, you can't change all at the same time. I can't be changing my culture, fixing my culture, fixing my processes, fixing policies, everything at the same time. Yes, I can change everything, but not at the same time in the same phase. So it can be in different phases. And it's important that people for remote workers remember that when people work on site, the tendency of distraction is lower. But when people work off-site, when they work remotely, even sometimes for the comfort of their home, research has proven that the distraction rate is usually higher. So why don't we emphasize what is changing, not just what is changing? So you need to emphasize in your communication plan what is not changing to your people. How do you do this? I would advise that you use multiple channels to communicate. When you are communicating with them, calls, you could use emails, you could use chats, video calls, newsletters, some will say virtual online forms. even virtual meetings. You could use all of these multiple channels to communicate. Now, we all know about what we call the fishbowl discussion. We have what we call the fish virtual bowl discussion. This is an online version of the physical fishbowl discussion. It has proven to be an effective strategy adopted to facilitate debates, which allows everyone to express their views and opinions. Now, what we know and what people have done over the years is what we call the virtual board discussion, which is physical. But now this has to be taken online, really for those working in remote environments. And the reason is the main aim is to give room for everybody to have a voice. It has been a strategy that has been adopted for organizing medium and large group discussions. So one way I told you, multiple channels of communication. You have to look at the most effective, and you can even use it allows everyone to come together. Some people will talking, hear their views, have a voice. And when people know that their voices will be heard, their opinions can be heard, then they are likely to feel motivated, committed, and engaged. And when you are sending out your messages, you should remember the 7 C's of communication. But most importantly, when you are sending out your messages, you must make sure that your messages are clear. You must make sure they are consistent. You must be concise, complete. It must be correct. So when you are sending out information, please ensure that you double check all of these things. It's clear. You don't use ambiguous words. It has to be concise. Let it be written in language, words that people can easily work with, people can easily complement. You want to also make sure that you prevent your remote workers from feeling, like I said, isolated, depressed. So in communication, you must ensure that you communicate frequently. So communication must be clear and be done frequently. You must do it frequently. I will not tell you how it should be done. The peculiarity of the change agenda and even your organization or your team members will determine how it's done. Some will say, look, let's communicate weekly. Some will opt for communicating every other day, daily. Some will opt for communicating weekly, every fortnight. Some say, I want to communicate monthly. So you must look at what could work. It depends on the intensity of the change agenda, like I said. So you must look at what will work, but you must ensure that you do it frequently. So frequently is dynamic, it's not static. So it depends on your organization. You must give regular updates on progress made. When you are making progress, it must be measurable. This is what we have planned to achieve. At this first phase, is we achieve 100% of what we set to achieve. This must be communicated with to your remote members. It's important. They need to know so that you can assess themselves. And you must also give valuable reports. This is what we have done. This is where we are, and you must recognize valuable inputs. When your remote workers have suggested or given some ideas that have worked, recognize them. When you recognize them, they'll feel motivated to do more. Okay? And most important, we say communication is a two-way channel. You must build an effective feedback mechanism. You must ensure that you give room for remote team members to ask questions, give their opinions or comments, and even suggestions about the change process. I must acknowledge it. When people send in questions, I must give yourself a timeline. So the timeline could be once we receive questions or feedback or comments, suggestions, we get back to you within 24 hours. And you should maintain it to be consistent. So if we implement this, it makes strategic implementation process seamless. Communication plays a very major role if you are implementing a change agenda. Well, thank you so much for staying tuned. We'll be right back after this break. So if you're just joining us, thank you so much for joining us today. We are discussing so far measures that can be implemented to reduce the impediment to effective strategic change implementation. The second I'll be discussing is that you offer relevant intervention. You offer or you provide relevant interventions. What do I mean? Naturally, there are challenges that would occur in adapting to a change agenda, in implementing one. So as a change manager, you need to support your remote team members in adapting to the new change era. Remote team is quite challenging, and I've said it because we have less physical interaction. It's so difficult to read their emotions. So how do you offer relevant intervention when you don't even know what those interventions are? I will talk about how to handle this. The first thing is, in the change process, it's better that you set clear, measurable goals. I'll take it again. You need to set clear, measurable goals. Now, if you have set those goals and they are clearly stated, and people talk about SMART goals, okay? They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're reliable, they're timely goals. But even the ER, the SMART goals, you can evaluate the goals and review. But when you set the SMART goals, they are measurable. So it helps you to monitor progress. Once you do not set those goals, you cannot measure. So once you set those goals, it becomes easier for you to monitor progress of your change agenda, monitor progress of team members, because already you have an expectation, in mind. And this should be clearly stated, written down, and it should be communicated to your team members, your remote team members. It's important. So once you set those goals, you are able to monitor and identify those gaps. So once you see those gaps, you can now think of how do you intervene. You can identify what are those specific interventions that you are going to support your remote team workers with. And it could come in various ways. It could become through coaching. You could coach them. What intervention could be in implementing the change agenda, could be mentoring. Sometimes it could be training, and it could even be that what you want to do is specific in terms of kind of training, is leadership development training programs. But that's the start point, is your ability to set clear, measurable goals. So it helps you to manage your remote team workers. You don't see them every day. You can't see them most times physically. But when you set those goals, they have what to work with. They can now set weekly goals for themselves in achieving the overall change agenda goals, which is important. Another one you have to do is that you must build an environment of high level of trust and engagement. You have to be deliberate as a change manager in creating an environment where everyone feels treated with respect, dignity, and honor. It's very important. Nobody wants to work in an environment where they don't feel valued. We want to work in an environment where they don't feel respected. So because you don't even see them physically most of the time, you must create that environment where they feel respected, where they don't feel that dignity trampled upon, and where they feel honored. You must be an environment that is value-based. A value-based environment who places the honor, who prioritize remote team workers. You must be a value-based, where you reward according to the value they are giving to the organization, where they feel respected, you celebrate them when they have to be celebrated. This would help you build trust with your team members, and when you build trust with a remote team member, it will enable you get their buy-in, irrespective of where they are working from. When they feel valued, when they feel respected, they don't find the environment stifling. They feel it's an environment where they can grow. It becomes a win-win for it, and they're ready to adapt to whatever changes are becoming that way in ensuring that the set goals are met. For remote team workers, like I said, is less of physical face-to-face interaction. So they know when you don't care. People know when you truly care about them. So you must show genuine concern for them. You must be open, transparent, honest in communicating with remote team members. This is very important. It's important. Like I said, communication plan is important. It must be clear. It must be done frequently, and it varies. You must offer relevant interventions when necessary. You must build an environment of high level of trust and engagement. You must also encourage, last but not the least point, you must encourage collaboration among your members. We know that it's a remote environment, but you must also ensure that you create avenues, virtual avenues, where they can interact, even the on-site team members. When you build collaboration among your people, it enhances communication flow. And when people can work together, when communication flow is seamless, then you can achieve your set objectives as an organization. So it's important that you must encourage an environment where people can collaborate, an environment of healthy competition, not fierce competition, not unhealthy competition, an environment where people, motivate one another. This is very important, especially in a remote environment. Thank you so much for staying tuned. We'll be drawing the curtain at this point. Okay, so feedback, questions, suggestions, kindly send a mail to contact@thearmorgate.org. I'll take it again. For feedback, comments, suggestions, kindly send a mail contact@thearmorgate.org, or you can send a WhatsApp message to our WhatsApp line +234 8079574151. I'll take it again, +234 8079574151. If I've learned one or two things on this episode today, kindly click the like button. Thank you so much for staying tuned. Hope to meet with you same time, same station next week. I remain your host, Titilola Ogunshola, saying bye for me.